Hotline diagram. This is from our book, Modern American Canasta, the complete guide. We are here, as you know, if you're on our Facebook group, we answer questions quickly. Many of you have emailed us. Our email is modernamericancanasta@gmail.com. And I'm going to turn it over to Donna to kick it off and introduce herself.
Okay, well, I'm Donna Miller-Small, the other half of the Dara and Donna show. We are co-authors. We got to know each other. Well, that's a long story through mahjong, actually. And connected, wrote a book in less than a year and became bestie friends. So I'm from Long Island and part-time in Florida. Have been teaching mahjong and canasta for many, many years. And just delighted to be with all of you tonight.
Thank you. And I'm just going to admit a few people while. Okay. And I am Dara Collins. I thought when my mom played years ago that mahjong and canasta was something that I never would learn to play. And fast forward several years, and when our kids were little, it was something that was just a great way to connect with friends. And a lot of times you wouldn't say to somebody, I'm going to go sit at someone's house and talk for 4 hours, but you would say, I'm going over to stretch my brain muscles and play mahjong or canasta. And as Donna said, we met through mahjong, and it's kind of confusing because if you know me from mahjong, you know me as Donna Miller-Kasman. So this is Donna Miller-Small. So there are two different Donnas. So I just work well with wonderful Donnas. So for today, I am going to, let's see, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. So we appreciate everybody that sent in questions. It really started rolling in yesterday and today. I guess a lot of you thought of things as it got closer. We will try to address everything that we received. Donna had a great idea right before we started. After we finish reading the question and our answer, we're going to just take a little break. And if it's something we didn't cover about that question, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand and we'll go on. If it's something about something else, we might table it and get back to it at the end of the session. So with that being said, I'm going to stop the share. And Donna is going to take off with what are good discards and are there safer cards to discard? And this is something that a lot of new players have a hard time with. Oh, you're muted, Donna. You're still muted.
It's a question that came up recently. I taught another couple, I think they're on, and my husband. And as we were chatting, that was a question. You know, what cards do you discard? Well, a lot of the strategies, and it's a strategy. There are rules about discarding cards on an empty tray, but in general, a lot of the strategies have to do with the flow of the game. So in the beginning, you're going to discard certain cards, and as the game progresses, that will likely change. In the beginning, you're looking to open, and hopefully all of you have a knowledge that you know what opening means. So you're likely going to throw single cards. Remember, you want to get, sometimes the hardest thing is to get those three natural cards, the pure melt that you need to open. So pairs are important if you don't open with a triple. Pairs are really important in general in the game. I do in the beginning, I'll throw a single card. If it's a low single, it's probably going to be that, although there is a strategy for holding lower cards. Remember, we're going to hold 1, 2, but not 3 sevens. So that's going to be a factor in the beginning. So that's in the beginning. You know, in the beginning, your sole purpose really is to be able to open in whatever way that is. Those of you who have played for a while know that there's something called special hands. And your strategy with discarding might be a little bit different if you're going for one of those. As the game progresses, depending on where you are, if your opponents have not opened, you don't have to worry that much about them. They can't pick the discard pile. But if they have opened, and particularly if you've both opened, you're going to vie for the discard pile. But what if you haven't opened? We talk about in our book, and it's a term that I came up with early on that we used a lot writing our book. This is a game of nuanced decision making, and interesting that term has been used by other people in the canasta world. It's nuanced decisions because it depends on a lot of different factors. So we're giving you some general strategies. If you haven't opened, your purpose is still to open. And it might mean giving your opponents the discard pile. If you're vying for the discard pile, you want to throw the safest cards you can. And I find looking back 3 cards is a good, it's allowed. And if you look back 3 cards, you're going to know what the person you're discarding to threw last. So the person on my left is the person I'm always going to be discarding to. If I look back 3 cards and she threw a 5, that might be an indication that that was a single card. If your opponents are open, say they've just opened. Well, the person on the left had opened. They're not going to have a lot of cards in their hand. If they've got 3 kings down or 3 jacks, likely they don't have another 2. So I'm gonna stop, and we're gonna, as we bring up the questions, we're going to check in with you to see if you have further questions that we haven't addressed in this specific topic. We have a lot of things to cover, but
And the one thing I have to add on that is, if you're at a high round, if you're at like 180 and you happen to not need low cards, even at other required point count, 4s, 5s, and 6s are great to keep, because those are often just discarded really nonchalantly by other players. And then those become great to pick the pack. So even if you have a pair of 4s, but you already have other high cards and you have a pair of those, sometimes it's just great to keep those and then hopefully pick the pack with them. That's one. And then also with safe discards, the other thing to consider is sometimes I'll sit there fretting over what card. And my husband made a comment one time, there's only 2 cards in the discard pile. Like, you know, so sometimes if it's not that big of a pack, you don't have to worry that much. There's an expression, protecting the pack. You really want to protect the pack when it's a big, juicy pack of a lot of cards. So if there's anyone that has anything to add about this specific topic, I see some other comments.
To raise your hand and put the comments in the chat. I want to add to that. Sometimes I might save a safer card to throw when the pack gets bigger,
Right.
juicier. I might take the chancy card. And the other thing I will do, and sometimes I'll throw a sacrifice card. If I've got aces melded and they haven't, I know they're not going to pick aces, and I've got 1 ace in my hand, I might sacrifice that to protect the pack.
And just as a reminder from some of you who are, you're saying you're beginners, if you are throwing to somebody that has 5 of a card, they can't pick the pack, because canasta is a game of counting to 7. So if there's 5 cards down and you throw a card and they have 2, they can't just willy-nilly get rid of that 8th card. So once the person, it's in the 5th position, that's a safe card. A dead card is a safe card. We believe you can't discard wild cards. That is not allowed. However, the exception is if you only have wild cards and the next player cannot pick the pack with wild cards. So a wild card is a safe card. So we do recognize in our book that there are house rules, but for the most part, that is, to us, that makes no sense to be able to pick the pack with wild cards. So I think that we covered most of that. So the next question we get a lot is, in our book and on Zooms, we often mention that it's a good strategy to use the least number of cards to meld, to open with the least number of cards. Why is this important? And what if you have to meld with a lot of cards? Should you wait? Should you wait until you could pick the pack, or should you open right away? So first, in our book, we have a cute drawing of a stop sign, just reminding people, don't. Because if you have 5 10s, but to meet your required point count, you only need to put 3 of them, you're setting yourself up to pick the pack, because just like Donna said, they probably don't think you have that other 10. So keep as many cards in hand. A lot of new players will email us and say, how come everyone else gets to pick the pack and I don't? And our response is, are you keeping cards? And they say, no, I get everything out I can. It's a dance. It's like, I forget who said it, that it's dancing, doing everything he did, but backwards and in high heels. You have to work with your partner and figure out, if you have 4 cards and you think they might have the 5th and you have 2 wilds, it's a dance to figure out when to put those cards out. There's no exact timing, but it gets more intuitive as the game goes on. The other thing is, you want to pick the pack, you want to meld opening. Now, Donna and I are very in sync with 98% of the book. Our style of play is a little different. I consider myself, which is kind of funny because I'm not a risky person, but at the game table, I consider myself a little bit more of a risky player. And I will sit back. The first thing I do when I arrange my cards is I look how close I am to a special. And Donna laughs that my husband and I are always getting specials. I will look and see, hey, if I have 12 cards and all I need are 2 more, why am I going to open now if the other team isn't even, I think, close to opening? Let me let it sit for a little bit. Of course, the riskiness is they could get a special. If my special has 3 aces or 7s, I could be stuck. Or I change my mindset once I see, well, wait a second, what if my special has 9s and I might have to switch to use the 9s and they're about to close 9s? So there's a lot of, as Donna said, nuanced decision making, because you have to just weigh all of these factors all of the time while you're just picking and throwing a card. So like if they had a diagram of an advanced canasta player, there would be 800 different bubbles coming out of their head. But that's what we have to think of for each thing. If I have a lot of pairs and I hope I can pick the pack, even if I could open, I might wait and say, you know what? I'm letting my partner take this one and I'm going to pick the pack. Let them open. If they don't and the pack is dwindling down, it's kind of like a mountain. We get to the middle of the stockpile and nothing's happened. Okay, now I'm gonna open. So there's risks, and a huge risk is the number of 3s. So somebody asked me today, do you like 3s? It depends. If you have 2 canastas, you love 3s. If you haven't yet opened, you're scared of 3s. So if I see those 3s building up, then I decide to open. So now I'm going to kick it back to Donna, and she'll give her reasonings for delay.
I also want to add, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat. We are going to cover the questions that were emailed to us. And then if you have other questions that we haven't covered, we will get to those, hopefully, if we have time at the end. We want to honor the people that sent in questions. Well, this was the topic of how soon do you open? I'm for opening as soon as possible. The only caveat I put in, and the only time I wouldn't do that, is if I have one ace in my hand and wilds to go with it. You can't open without wild cards, folks. We've done the numbers. It just isn't possible. If I've got one ace and it's early and my competitors have not opened, I might wait a pick or 2 to open. The other thing is, if my opponents are going for if when your opponents need 180 points and sometimes 155, they're likely going for a special hand. Particularly if I've got 2 jokers in my hand, there with 180 points, if you don't have jokers, you cannot open. So again, that's the nuanced decision making. but I don't want to wait so long that they go down with the special hand and I'm not open and in the game. So that's where that nuance is. It depends what the required point count is for the other team, your competitors. And if it's high, be mindful that they might be going for a special hand. Usually it takes a while for a special hand, but we've seen it happen on the second or third draws. So that's my thought about opening.
And also just with aces, closing aces when the other team is at 180 is so helpful. So normally if I'm playing and I have 2 aces and a wild card out, and in my hand I have 2 more aces, if they're at 180 and they haven't opened yet, rather than waiting to see if my partner or waiting to pick the pack, I might put those down so my partner could add a wild card and we could close those aces. Because if they're at 180 and they can't use aces, that's really tough. So, okay. So question number 3 for Donna. What are strategies about special hands? How long do you delay in going for a special when you could open, but you're close to a special?
Okay. And I did see a question in the chat. How many special hands are there? I can't tell you offhand how many. We have a chapter and a visual in our book with special hands. I don't think we've done a video on it. But there are.
It's zip code, the regular pairs without wilds, pairs with just 1 pair of wild, pairs with both wilds. There's the straight, which is the only one you could use a 3. And then there's,
Well, there's 4 main special hands that are played. The zip code is played the most widely played. I played with my husband and friends yesterday. My husband got a special hand for the first time. He got the zip code, and then later in another round, I got a zip code. The zip code, I think, is made 85 to 90% of the time. It's the easiest one. And by the way, we have point values in our book that are different from what you're going to see on most online games and people who have given out special hands. Our zip code is 1,500 points. It's such an easy hand. It should not get, in our opinion, we analyzed the special hands.
and the reason for that is sometimes you could be set and need any one of 4 cards for it. And it just seems if Canasta's basis is that it's a partnership game, it just kind of feels like a few special hands and the whole round, the whole game is over. It doesn't feel like a partnership game. So that was our.
Right. But we see in playing online and live, it's the pair hands and the zip code that are made the mostly. Okay, but the question is, what strategies do you think about with special hands? How long do you wait? I think my sister talked to me about this. How long do you wait for a special hand? And do you open if you're waiting for a special hand? So again, it's nuanced decision making. It depends where your competitors are. Sometimes, folks, there's no choice. You have to go for a special hand because you don't have the points to open. If you don't have wild cards, you're not going to be able to open. So those cards really are going to point you in the direction you need to go. If you open with 5, if I open with 5 pairs, I might think about a pair's hands, but it also depends. Do you have wild cards? If I have a joker and a 2, it's not going to be an easy go to make a pair's hand. So it's normally, I think about pair's hands when I don't have particularly jokers. Remember, there's only 4 jokers. If you've got to have a pair or a triple of jokers, it's not going to be easy to get. 2s are another thing. The special hand I got last night, I had 3 2s. And we needed 180 points. 3 2s were not enough to get to 180 points. So it's really driven by where your required point count is and how many wilds that you have, mostly jokers. I will tell you, let's talk about this for a minute. And we have a lot of videos and tonight we are videoing this. So if you want to go back and re-listen, or you missed a point, or want to recommend it to a friend who couldn't make it, it's on our YouTube channel. There is something called a courtesy special. So if Dara and I are playing together, which we haven't in a while, and Dara opens, I have one turn if I'm going for a special to draw the 14th card. So Dara and I, it was one of the Let's Play videos we did. We're doing this online. We're recording a YouTube video, and our partner opened, and we were one away from a special hand, and the opponent threw us a card we could pick the pack with. I don't think it was a big pack, and the two of us, you hear us chatting on the video, let's go for the special. Let's try one more. We picked the card, and we got a special hand. So again, that's, we could have picked the pack. There was probably a reason we went for that special. So that's what I have to say. Do you want to add anything, Dara? She's the queen. Dara and her husband, David, are the king and queen of special. They make specials. I'm playing against them online, and boy, they make specials one after another.
So something that my husband brought up when we were playing, and it's like, who is in striking distance to win? If opening isn't going to do anything, but if you get a special, you might be able to prevent the other team, then don't open. Try for that special. So I always look at the score. I always see are we over 6,000? Is the other team over 6,000? Because they're really high scoring specials, those come few and far between. So I look at both teams' scores. I look at if the other teams opened, if they've closed canastas, and we have a whole thing in the book about reading the cards. If you remember some of the discards, if you remember the cards that are out there, if you need, like Donna said, if you need a special and the only thing that'll complete it is a joker, and there's 2 jokers already out, well, that diminishes your chance. So it's the law, it's numbers. If you're going for a zip code, can you get any? Sometimes I'll have cards where I have a pair of 2s, and I could either do the 3-3-3-2 hand or the zip code, and I could have one of any of 4 cards. In that case, I'm going to wait some time to see if I could get that card. How many 3s both teams have, if that delay is going to hurt us if they get a special. And sometimes just from paying attention to clues of discards, it gives you somewhat of a sixth sense of whether it makes sense to open or to, and that just comes with time.
I want to jump in for a minute. I saw something in the chat. Somebody posted in the chat that the courtesy special is a table rule. It's honestly, folks, what we have done with our book, and this is why we wrote a book. I've been teaching for over a decade, and there isn't a standardized set of rules, and we're not the authority, but we hold teachers and players and online games, and we wrote what the most widely played rules are, and the courtesy is played. It's played in every game I play, and it's played online on the online games. So anything, I guess, if you want to consider, could be a table rule, but the courtesy special is standardized, played all over. So there's differences. Okay.
Okay, so we're moving on to 7s. So just if any of you, because I just got a message from someone that she's new, 7s can never be melded with wilds. They are always pure. So unless for some reason you have 7 in hand, or you do not open with 7s. You can never use them in a meld, and you could only make a pure 7 meld, a pure 7 canasta. After you meld 7s, you cannot end the round. So you might be stuck just sitting and picking and discarding until the end of the round. It's a 2,500 point penalty. People often ask if the rule is you should keep 2 aces and no more, and 2 7s and no more. Well, then how can you ever go out? So it's a game of counting how many 7s in the pile and when it is safe to discard a 7. And you'll see. I mean, you never want to throw the 5th 7. especially if you're playing Unreal Canasta. The bots never mess up. If you throw that fifth seven, they will close the sevens. And actually, we spoke with the programmers, and Donna had noticed that one time one of the bots threw a seven, and we're going to get into signaling later, but the bots are programmed to signal. So we will get into that in like 2 questions.
Well, and I want to add though, which was really interesting because my bot partner threw a seven and I assumed there were two, and I picked the discard pile with sevens and the bot didn't have two. And what they did say is the bots are all, which I thought was really interesting programming. The bots will throw a seven to defend the pack. So when we talk about, so they're not, you can't always read that seven, that they're going to have two to cover to make you seven, which I thought. And also the bots, like us, if you have a void in cards towards the end and you end up with 2 wild cards and 2 sevens, what do you have to throw? Sevens. And they have to do that. And that's the time you have to be careful with giving too many sevens and having the pack picked. And that happened, I don't know if my sister's on tonight, when we were playing, she melded, I think, 3 jacks and it left her with wild cards and sevens. She threw a seven and the bots got a sevens canasta.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is the visual that we came up with when we did a canasta class. If you're keeping 2 sevens and the other team puts out 5 thinking they're going to close it, you are preventing them. It is the most underlying strategy, and this happens with pure aces and sevens. So if aces aren't melded with wilds, and anytime you have sevens, if you or your partner keep 2, you are preventing the other team from getting them. So there's so many factors of throwing sevens. If you think you could pick the pack and you know that your partner had already picked it and that you were counting sevens and you know they have 3 and you could get, it's great. It's a 2,500 point windfall. If the discard pile's heavy, you have to know how many turns you hope you'll have left in order to get rid of those sevens and get back down to 2. An important consideration in that, and sometimes this is hard to explain, but if you look at, if you're at the turn card yet, normally when you get to the turn card, everybody has 2 turns. But if there's not all the 3s out yet, those take away from your turn. So make sure you're taking into consideration how many real turns you're going to get in order to get rid of the sevens. Sometimes you might pick the deck knowing you're going to be stuck with sevens, but you have 7 3s and no closed canastas. So all of these are different factors that you have to weigh. And they're all discussed in more detail in our book. And Donna, for the aces, do you want to go over the same thing about aces?
Sure. And they are the trickiest part of this game. And there's more rules and strategies in Modern American Canasta about aces being melded, pure or mixed. You don't want to meld pure aces. They never want to be your pure meld when you open. That would be suicide. The only time you want to meld pure aces would be if you know you have 7 of them. So let's go back to the beginning. Ideally, you want to meld aces and wild cards. Once any team, either team melds aces and wild cards and they're mixed, nobody can get a pure canasta because you have a minimum of 2. So you've opened with 2 and a wild card or 2. That only leaves 6 aces. Nobody's going to get a canasta of it. So what happens if my team opens and we don't use aces, we have to wait to see what happens to the other team. So until you see both teams are open, you want to hold 2 aces in your hand at least, and not 3. Although if you're opening, you might want to hold 3, but you want to have the strategy of sevens with aces until you've seen if any team opens with wild and sevens. As Dara talked about this before, particularly if the other team needs a lot of points to open, if you can open with aces and wilds and close it out, you've got them closed out of high value cards. So it's a good strategy. You want to be careful with, just like with sevens, you want to be careful with pure aces. Even if there's a mixed ace canasta, there still could be some aces on the loose, and they might be in the discard pile. It's always great to count aces and sevens. Well, sevens always, aces if they're not mixed. And
Well, it's interesting you say that, Donna, because if somebody closed the aces, so you know there's 5 in the closed ace, and then there's 3 out there. If you pick the pack thinking you're going to be safe, you don't get to discard an ace on the empty pile. So if the other team goes out before you get a turn, you're stuck with aces, even though they closed aces. So
correct.
it's just
See a lot of
something really-
questions coming up in the chat, and I don't want to get distracted with them. I want to stay on
Yeah.
the
Well,
question.
actually, this was based back on what I said.
Right.
With sevens and with threes, when you know, or figuring out how many turns, a lot of players sometimes get confused. And also, I think in a different, older style of canasta, you did not replace threes after the turn card. And also, you do not, and this is the same, you do not get a talon after the turn card. So I think a lot of times players confuse the two.
But
Once you reach the turn card, you only pick your talon up until that card. You replace threes up until you can't, which is the last card.
Correct. And that can throw off people with, if you're not counting threes, you're not going to have as many turns on those last 8 cards.
Right.
But there was a question in the chat. Yes, you replace your threes as long as you can. There's a quirky little thing if the 3 is the last card, but I don't think we're going to go there at this point. You want to move on, Dara?
Sure. So the next question, my partner and I agreed to signal. So before we go on, does anybody need, just raise your hand if you need a definition of signaling for aces and sevens in the chat. So there's no talking and communicating in canasta. So just as an aside, I was at a mahjong tournament and one of the women and I were talking about canasta, and she said growing up, she would never play with her mother. And I said, why? And she said, because she would look at me across the table and go, I don't know if you could see me, but she would take her fingers in the number 3 and put it across. She said her mother would communicate with her during the game. So there is no talking during the game. There's no pulling of ear. The only way you could communicate is by the cards that you put on the discard pile and by asking one time before putting any cards down if you can go out once per round. So signaling is not a guarantee. It's not a science. You should ask your partner beforehand if you're going to signal, and also just have an understanding. My husband knows that I love to go for special hands. So if I'm throwing a 7, it's not a clear signal that I have 2 more in my hand. I could be going for a special hand. If you're playing with the bots, like we just said, they never miscount. If they throw a 7, if you throw the 5th 7, they will pick the pack. Just like real players, there are several exceptions to when you are throwing an ace or a 7, and it is a either false signal or you don't have another 2 in your hand. And we go into this more in detail in our book, but some of them are when you first open. Sometimes you first open and you want to keep a pair. So if it's new and there's not that many aces or 7s in the pack, you might throw one of them just so you could keep a pair. Also, you might get aces and 7s in your talon, so you might kind of offset yourself and protect yourself. If you're going for a special hand, if it's a really large discard pile and you've been counting aces and 7s and you know there aren't that many, you can use one of them to protect the pack, and you're going to discourage the competitor from likely picking the pack. And finally, if it's towards the end and you think there are a lot, and you throw one baiting them to hopefully pick it and then being stuck because you still have 2. So there's a lot of nuanced decision of how to signal. For the most part, if you put a 7 or an ace down, your partner assumes you have 2 in hand, but you just have to realize that there are times where that's just not the case. So it's not an exact science.
I want to add, this is a partnership game. It was founded by 2 bridge players. we know bridge is a partnership game. If whoever you're going to play with, if you're playing with the same people, you're likely going to have the same partners week after week, or a variety of them. I think it's really important to talk to your partner about signaling with sevens and what the exceptions might be. That's a hard
Before
thing
the game starts.
Yeah, yeah. Just like partners in bridge have certain conventions they play, and because you can't talk in bridge, you can't even bid anymore out loud. But I think it's important to have an agreement with your partner and to know, first of all, some people don't like signaling, and you got to talk about that. There's a couple of times where my partner will know that when I throw a seven, it's not a signal. When I open, we give each other a pass, particularly if you're down to 3 or 4 cards. You need to have some cards in your hand. So that's a time to give your partner a pass. If there's, and this is what the guys told us from Real Canasta, if there's a really thick, juicy pack, you might want to play defensively. And, and your partner needs to know that. You don't want to do it early for no reason. And if you need high value, high required point counts, likely you're going for a special. And the pairs hands with wilds, you need sevens, but the other hands, you don't have to have sevens. So you might throw one, but again, you have that understanding with your partner. It's a little bit hard online. Sometimes when I get online and I'll go in the chat, I'll say, do you signal sevens? And they'll say yes or no, so I know. But I think that's really important. Even if you're playing with a group of 4 people and you're rotating, you're going to be partners. Talk about what, that's a key signaling strategy. Same thing with aces. So we've talked about. Okay.
So moving on, do I always need to have a discard and a card in hand when I open?
The answer is, depending on when you open. If you open before the turn card, including the turn card, you can meld all your cards because it allows you to have a talon. So those are your replacements.
Well, meld all your cards except the discard. You always have to have a discard.
Yeah, you have to have a discard, yes. But when you discard, you will have nothing. Correction. So yes, you have to have a discard. In the old days, you had to have a card in your hand. Not anymore. If you get up, and it's happened to me, that it's taken me a long time to open, and I'm up to the after the turn card, and I'm not getting a talon, and I don't have a discard. So that's an important aspect of understanding how to pick and throw. And if you're not able to open, usually you don't have either the pure or the point count. If you need high required points, you got to think about holding some of those high value cards because you won't have enough if you have too many low value cards. Let me just think if there's anything in their notes.
And it's just a reminder that it's different than threes. It's two different things, but people usually confuse or blend the two. So you do keep replacing threes after the turn card, but you do not pick your talon after the turn card.
And you know what? I just want to say something. I don't think we have a separate thing, but it just came to mind because I saw a post on one of the groups. Your talon is taken after you discard, and it's 4 for the first team, the person on the first team, 3 for the second. Those are your cards. They go in your hand. There was a question about that. They're in your hand, just that you can't play them till your next turn. And whatever you select in your hand can be a positive or a negative. And there are times that maybe you've got 2 sevens and you've got a third one that you picked in the discard pile, in the talon. Those are your cards, and you are penalized if somebody should go out if you open late. So there was a question just today, I think, or yesterday in one of the Facebook groups about the talon. The talon becomes your cards after you throw. Okay, we're gonna
as an aside, the one time you can put all of your cards down is if you have your required point count and you're pure and you're picking the pack to open. So you could put everything down. I know Donna just smirked. She doesn't like picking the pack to open. She played before it was part of the game. So if you put all your cards down, your discard can be from the pack. So it's different when you open and then get your talon, you have to end your turn first and then get the talon. When you pick the pack to open, you can throw from the discard pile to end your turn.
Yeah, I saw somebody just post, and it's not, it's in their New York and Florida games that they have to have a card in hand. That's not the most widely played way. That's their table rule. But
And
the
that's one
online,
thing that it's important before you sit down, ask somebody their mill base, ask somebody details like this, and make sure you agree before you play. I mean, there's some people that play with certain house rules that we don't recognize that greatly alter the game that I might choose not to play if that's the house rule. You know, it depends. So definitely discuss house rules before.
yeah, we'll get to some of the extra questions if we have time. But moving right along, we're going into the next question that
So this is one of the most confusing aspects. And we were just talking about picking the pack to open. If you're picking the pack to open, you need to independently already be able to pick the pack. So the top card never counts for pure. The top card never counts for points. The only way you add that card for either a pure or point, well, never points, but is if you have 3 more cards from your hand that match that card. So if the top card's a king and you add 2 kings, that is a 0 meld. If the top card's a king and you add 3 kings, it's a 30-point meld because the cards from your hand count. And the same thing would be as if you had 2 kings and a wild card. So it only counts for when you have 3 in your hand. And in our book, let me see if I could share the screen. Let's see. Share screen. Oh. So here is an example of picking the pack. In this example, you have 70 points from your king and your wild joker. You have 30 points from your 2 4s and your 2. And those 10s give you 30 points because the top card was a 10, so it didn't count, but you do have that. In example 2, you are using, as Donna likes to call it, like your entree to pick the pack. You're using those 10s just to enable you to pick the pack, but they are not giving you any points and they are not counting as a pure. So that's just something that I know confuses a lot of players. Okay, so moving on. And also what I just showed you, we break down in a much lengthier video on our YouTube channel. So youtube.com/@modernamericancanasta. And we go through different examples of what opening to pick the pack is. So people have told us that's very helpful. Donna, how does your strategy change when you're using a mel base of 5 versus a mel base of 3? And does it impact if you hold wilds to see if your partner has more?
well, we did a webinar on meld bases, and there is a YouTube video of that whole night that we spent on meld bases. When Dara and I were writing the book, we did polling to find out what the most commonly used meld base is, and it's 5, and then 3 is behind it. Obviously, if you haven't played with 5, you might not know this. First of all, a meld base is how many cards after this is governed after you open. So after opening, it's the rule that covers how many wilds can be added, when wilds can be added, how many natural cards need to be in a meld. So if you're playing a mill base of 3, if you had 3 10s up there, you could add a wild card or a 2. If you're playing a mill base of 5 and you had 3 10s, you would need to add 2 more 10s before you're able to add wild cards. It's gonna drive wild cards to be in your hand longer. And maybe you're going to end up with a few wild cards. It's a harder way to play, but it's a more challenging way, we feel.
And the whole entire table plays the same mill base, so it's challenging for everyone.
Correct. And if you're playing online, there's a choice of mill bases, and that's something you have to decide with your group. Whether you're playing a mill base of 3 or 5, or God help you if you're playing with 2, it's not done very often, not that we see. So any further questions about this? We went over it quickly. And by the way, yeah, there's so much strategy as we're talking about. This is all about strategies mostly. When Dara and I were writing our book, first of all, we never thought it was going to be 128 pages with an 8.5 by 11. As we started to write the book, we realized how much strategy. We have 14 chapters of strategy in there. So there's a lot of strategy in this game.
So the next question is, what is the rule about asking someone to go out? Is it required? When can you do this and how often? So you are allowed to ask your partner 1 time per round. And the big caveat, which I love playing on Real Canasta, they haven't addressed this yet, and we will hope they will. In their game, you can ask at any time. So a lot of people don't realize that the rule is you must ask before you put down any cards. And someone asked today, how come? Like, what's the rationale for that? And one thing that I take from Donna is the game is a very fair game. If you are doing really well run round, the next round, you have to have a higher required point count. You're trying to let the other people kind of catch up. If you pick the pack and you get all these terrific cards, you can't get rid of your ace or your 7. So there's a lot of checks and balances in the game. So when you go out, you get 100 points. It might really prevent the other team from closing canastas. It might be really valuable for you. So you have to plan ahead. It's a check and balance. You have to plan ahead before you put any cards down and know you can go out. And sometimes it's really impressive. I mean, I'll be playing online and I'll see someone with like 11 cards and they're like, can I go out? I'm like, no, I'm not ready for you to go out, you know, when they're my opponent. So the only thing you could say online and in person is yes or no. When my dad was first learning how to play, his answer was, well, wait, because I still could close some canastas. I'm like, no. It's yes or no. And the reasons you would say yes or no are because you have too many aces or too many 7s. Ideally, you're keeping track of how many aces and 7s are in the discard pile. And if your partner just picked a big pack and they didn't get rid of a lot of cards yet, save your question. Don't ask yet. Give them time to get rid of some of them before you ask. If your partner says no to your initial request and there's time that they'll have more turns to get rid of the cards, wait until they throw a natural card, a 5, a 10, before you go out, because otherwise you'll get stuck. Sometimes you might not even ask. Let's say you know your partner probably has 4 cards in hand and they could have 3 7s or 3 aces or whatever, but the other team has open wilds, open aces, they have a ton of 3s. I take the risk and I just go out because it might be more of an advantage to get them stuck with the penalty than worry about a small penalty for your team. So there's a lot of nuanced high strategy thinking with asking to go out. Somebody emailed us and said, I heard it's a rule that if you ask, you must ask to go out, which there's no rule, you don't have to. And that if they say yes, or if they say no, you must listen to them. And to that, I just kind of laugh. I don't know, other people who play other games, like there's certain rules in mahjong that there's no penalty. You know, what would the penalty be? And a lot of times, sometimes you think you could go out because before you picked the card in your mind, you knew, oh, I could get rid of these. And then you didn't even think about the fact that you can't get rid of the card you picked. So there's no penalty if you ask to go out and you can't. You just usually say, oh, sorry, and then it's the next player's turn. So in terms of trying to go out, a lot of people really put pressure on themselves to do this. And it's only 100-point bonus. The bigger aspect of going out is what you're doing to your opponent's score. So really don't force yourself to go out if it's something that's, you know, risky by getting rid of your aces and sevens to kind of whittle down to go out. And on that note, I think that's all I have on that.
Okay. Are we up to what we, I think we covered what we wanted to. Let's see if there's stuff in the chat.
And then also there's a little hand on the bottom. If you want, you could raise your hand and we could unmute you.
Okay. We've been answering some questions.
Yeah.
You know, so we saw a lot of questions flying up there. If you're first learning, oh, and Judy. Hi, Judy, friend. Hi. Do you want to unmute and ask a question?
Actually, it's a question from Liz, Donna. Good to see you.
Hi,
Hello.
Liz.
Hi, I've been playing a lot on the Real Canasta online and I love it. How come when you ask to like join a game, whether it's advanced or intermediate, people say some other time when they're not playing with anyone else? Like, is that so they can gain more points and they don't want to lose? Like, what is that about?
Boy, that's a good question. I would imagine one of two things. They might be waiting for friends to join them. If they haven't put themselves in invisible mode or friends can join me, you know, they might look at your points. If you haven't been playing a long time, they may not want you to join them.
Right.
If it's an intermediate game, if you're an intermediate and you've got yourself down, I don't, Dara, what other things come to mind for that?
Well, I mean, sometimes somebody was playing and they said they keep a list of the people that they enjoy playing with, and that, I'm Dara FL on Real Canasta. I will, unless someone is rude to me, I will play with anyone who asks to join. I do have to say that I like playing with my husband as my partner. So sometimes if you ask to join and they decline right away, I mean, don't be like when my kids were teenagers and they'd call 15 times in a row, but ask one more time maybe, because they might have been waiting.
It doesn't allow you to. Once you it
Oh,
says
they
some other
don't come
time,
back.
it doesn't allow you to. And then the other question on Real Canasta Online, if you notice, like some of the boxes at the top are green, and then at the bottom, some of them are orange. Is there a reason for the orange boxes
I
on the
think those
bottom?
might be like friend-only games or something like that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But definitely one bit of advice is if you're new, don't sign up for a fast advanced game, because people really expect to go fast. They expect the cards to be, pick and throw.
Right.
So practice with the box to improve your speed.
Oh,
And
I'm
the
a
other thing
shark.
to improve your speed is plan ahead and know what you're going to discard.
Yeah, thank
Have
you.
it in mind. Have it, even move it to the side if you want.
I see a question in the chat. If you go out with a special hand, do your opponents get to count their melds on the table? Or is it a wipeout? A special hand ends the game. Just like if one team, which they are, if Dara and I are partners and she puts down a special hand, that ends the game, just like if we were to go out. The scoring for the other team it depends where they're at. So the game is over. If they have at least one canasta, things count. If they don't have a canasta made, everything is minus, just the way it would be if we went out the traditional way. The game ends. We get a one lump score, Dara and I, nothing minus, nothing, no threes. We get 1,500 or 2,500, and the other team is scored as the game is ending, wherever they are. So that was
And
something.
just as an aside, we took all the house rules very seriously when we were writing the book. So we tried playing in person with wipeout scoring, and it really makes a difference in strategy, because if you know that you're not going to be dinged for aces and sevens, you might keep 4 aces and 3 sevens to go for a special when you normally wouldn't do that. So there's certain house rules that we're like, okay, if this is how your game plays, that's fine. If it's how your game plays, great. As long as you're happy, we have notes in the back, right? But just understand how it changes the game, recognize how it changes the game.
Okay. Somebody wrote, when you have natural sevens, do you count it in your point count as well? I guess you're meaning if you meld them. I'm not sure what you mean in your point count.
I think what they mean is anything on the table, and this goes for positives and negatives. So when you're doing the score at the end of each round, if you close a canasta, even if it's that all is a positive. If you're penalized for aces, you have 3 aces in your hand, so it's minus 1,500. It's also minus 60. You're double dinged. So with sevens, it's not as big of a deal because they're 5 points, but with aces, it adds up.
And just as a clarification point, a special hand ends the round, not the game. The game ends when you hit 8,500 or whoever has the highest, if you're both vying for.
And speaking of which for special hands on some of the online games, there's an 8,500 point special. And we felt that since it's a partnership game, that one special shouldn't end the whole game. So we actually lowered the value of that. So this was, we discussed it with players and teachers and game developers and came up with that.
Good. So anybody else have questions? Because I think
And in addition to questions, if there's other topics that you would either want to see us do another live Zoom or a recorded Zoom, either feel free to type it in the chat or send us an email. And if you know any friends and family that you want to introduce the wonderful game of Canasta to, we're starting a 4-part free series for AARP. If you just Google AARP and Canasta, you'll see the link for the first class. And it's starting this Wednesday. It's an hour and 15 minutes each class, and you have to register for each of the 4 classes.
Somebody questioned about that they were learning Canasta, and it sounded very different than what we have been discussing. You want to be playing Modern American Canasta. And just like anything else that I would do, I want to question what I'm learning and how that's being taught. So our goal is to standardize the game so that we have a community that plays pretty much the same way we would all use the same tune for Happy Birthday. And we want to energize our community. We want to unite it. We want to have less confusion and a lot of harmony. So that's our reason for being. And we're so happy that so many people came to talk about Canasta tonight.
It's great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.